Hello, my name is Brianna Kaleen, and welcome back to the Suffering for Art podcast, the podcast that explores the highs and the lows of being an everyday creative human. If you don't already know, Suffering for Art is hosting a retreat in the fall of 2026 in upstate New York for 7 artists to come and be renewed and refreshed. If you want to have some creative community, if you want a relaxing getaway, really good food, good times, you should definitely apply with a link in my bio. Without further ado, let's get into this episode. If you have already fallen off your New Year's resolution, congratulations, you're normal. And honestly, you might actually be closer to real change than the people still clinging to it. It's 2026, and you probably started this year with some really big goals, maybe even some life altering ones, things you told yourself had to change. Things like your routine, your work, your habits, your relationship with time, money, or yourself. Maybe you wrote everything down. Maybe you made a plan. Maybe you even stuck to it for 3 or 4 miraculous days. And then life happened. You missed a day, then another, and suddenly the routine felt fragile, heavy, or pointless. So you dropped it. Let me say this clearly. Falling off your New Year's resolution does not make you a failure. It makes you human. So, welcome to the club. To be honest, I think the intent behind a New Year's resolution is actually beautiful. You notice something in your life that needed to change, not because you're broken, but because you're growing. We are ever evolving people, so of course our lives should be evolving too. The real question isn't whether change should happen. The question isn't even if change is possible. The question we need to be asking is this: how do we create change that actually lasts in the middle of a chaotic, demanding, very real life? How do we stick with something long enough for it to become a habit, long enough for it to genuinely affect our lives? And that's what this episode is all about. Why New Year's resolutions fail by design, what your brain is actually doing when you fall off, and how to build goals that cooperate with your nervous system instead of fighting against it. So 2026 isn't about white knuckling discipline, but about creating systems that you can actually live and thrive inside. There's this really persistent myth, and I hear it all the time, especially in artistic spaces, definitely in theater. And I've told it to myself over and over again as a high achieving person. If I want it badly enough, I'll make it happen. And to be fair, that's not entirely wrong. To do anything challenging, especially like building sustainable systems, changing long-term habits, or making art when no one is watching, you do need some level of grit. That part of you that gets out of bed to go to the gym when it's still dark and cold. The part of you that sends the email, submits the audition, writes the page, shows up to practice even when the excitement has worn off. Because motivation is temporary, you won't always feel inspired. You won't always feel confident. And sometimes, yes, you do have to put your feelings aside and take the action anyway. But here's where the phrase kind of falls apart. The idea that wanting it badly enough will carry you through assumes a lot of things that just aren't true. It assumes your desires will stay consistent, your energy will stay high, your environment will stay supportive, and life won't life all over you. And that's just not how being human works. Because some days, what you want most isn't growth, it's rest. Yesterday's version of you wanted to hit your gym goals. This morning's version of you wants 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep and maybe a quiet breakfast without rushing. You set the alarm with the best intentions, you hit snooze. And suddenly that "I'm going to be consistent this year" promise has mentally rescheduled for next year. And honestly, like I said, that's human. The same thing happens with creative goals. You write every day until a busy week hits. You want to save money until your car breaks down or your rent goes up. You want to meal prep until you're emotionally exhausted and the idea of one more decision makes you want to cry on the kitchen floor. Some weeks your emotional bandwidth is just gone, especially if you're a woman. That luteal phase, don't get me started. Your body chemistry shifts, your patience drops, your energy tanks, and if your entire consistency plan is built on "I'll just push through" or "I'll feel motivated again soon," you're probably not accounting for how often life messes with your energy and focus. And then there's the environment. Maybe you move further away from the gym, or your practice schedule shifts, or your job hours shift, or the train that used to make things doable suddenly makes everything harder. When that happens, the goal that once felt urgent starts to feel not worth the effort anymore. So your routine slips and then it falls apart and then nothing changes, not because you don't care enough, but because caring isn't a system. This is where we get tripped up over and over again. We treat change like a personality trait. Like if we just want it more, we'll override exhaustion, hormones, grief, stress, money, time, and reality. But real change isn't about force. It's about rewiring your brain. Change is the slow, repetitive process of teaching your brain and body a new normal, new actions, new cues, new patterns of safety and reward. And if your habits aren't designed to survive the changing moods, fluctuating energy, messy schedules, unsupportive environments, they won't survive real life. Because discipline isn't about being unbreakable. It's about building systems that hold you when you're tired, overwhelmed, and not at your best. And that's the part no one tells artists. You don't need to work harder. You need structures that still work when you don't. Before we dive into practical structures, I want to slow down and talk about the neuroscience for a second, because I genuinely believe it's easier to be successful and kinder to yourself when you understand how your body and brain actually work. When we don't understand that, we end up designing goals that fight our biology instead of working with it. And then we inevitably fail. And we tell ourselves we're lazy, undisciplined, or just not built for consistency. So let's talk about willpower. Because like I said earlier, it's not a personality trait. You're not born with a stronger willpower or a weaker willpower. Willpower is a finite cognitive resource. That simply means it runs out. Your brain does not have unlimited access to self-control, focus, or restraint. Willpower operates more like a battery than a personality, and it drains as you use it. Every decision you make costs energy, not just big decisions, all of them. What to wear, what to eat, how to respond to an email, whether to hold your tongue, whether to push through discomfort, whether to resist scrolling, snacking, or shutting down. Neuroscientists often refer to this as the muscle model of willpower. Use it, and it gets tired. Overuse it, and it gives out. This is why you can feel incredibly disciplined in the morning and like a completely different person at night. You wake up thinking, today I'm eating well, I'm working out, I'm practicing, and not doom scrolling. And by 9 p.m., you're on your couch, eating whatever is fastest, watching something you don't even like, wondering what happened to the version of you from this morning. Nothing happened. Your brain is just tired. This phenomenon is often called ego depletion. The idea that using willpower for one task reduces how much you have available for the next one. So if you spent the day masking emotions at work, making 100 micro decisions, managing stress and rejection or social pressures, navigating conflict or uncertainty, you've already spent a huge chunk of your willpower before you even got to your personal goals. This is especially relevant for artists. Think about a day in the theater where you are regulating your nerves, rehearsals where you're taking notes and adjusting constantly, performing when you're hyper-focused and emotionally present, networking when you're on, even when you're exhausted. That's an enormous cognitive load. So when you get home and suddenly don't have it in you to journal or stretch or practice or cook or plan or be your best self, it's not a moral failing, it's just biology. Willpower allows for a daily depletion pattern. For most people, it's higher earlier in the day and steadily declines, and that's why habits you swore you wouldn't fall back into tend to show up at night. You're not suddenly worse at being disciplined after sunset, you're just working with less fuel. And here's the kicker, it's all the same pool. The same resources you use to resist temptation, control your temper, ignore distractions, make thoughtful decisions, push through discomfort. So if you burn through it managing stress, emotions, or survival, there's less left for growth. Yes, willpower can be replenished. Sleep is the biggest factor. Rest helps reset the system. Some theories also suggest glucose plays a role, meaning being underfueled makes everything harder, which is why it's important to eat. But even with replenishment, willpower is not meant to be the foundation of long-term change. There's another piece of neuroscience that I think is crucial to understand, especially if you're someone who sets big goals and then wonders why you keep freezing or avoiding or self-sabotaging. Your brain prioritizes safety over growth. Always, baseline period. That is its job. Your brain is not designed to help you become your highest self. Your brain is designed to keep you alive. So when you set a big goal, something unfamiliar or vulnerable or high stakes, your nervous system doesn't hear growth, it hears threat. Big goals equals uncharted territory. And uncharted territory means uncertainty. And uncertainty to your brain means danger, especially if you failed before. Your self-worth is tied to the outcome, money is on the line, visibility is on the line, rejection is a possibility. This is where the amygdala comes in. This is the part of your brain that detects stress or perceives threats. The amygdala activates the fight or flight response. Blood flow shifts away from rational thinking and turns toward survival mechanisms. And in modern life, fight or flight doesn't usually look like running or punching. It looks like procrastination, avoidance, doom scrolling, overthinking, suddenly needing to research more before you act, picking fights, quitting right before momentum builds. That's not laziness. That's not a lack of desire. That's your nervous system trying to protect you. And it's not that you don't want your goals. Your brain just doesn't think it's safe to pursue them yet. This is why telling yourself to just push through the fear often backfires, because once the amygdala is in charge, logic stops being persuasive. Which brings us to another important distinction. Goals and habits live in different parts of the brain. Goals live in the prefrontal cortex. I talk about this often. That is the part of your brain responsible for planning, logic, decision-making, and self-control. But the prefrontal cortex is energy intensive, easily fatigued, and only active for short periods of time. Habits, on the other hand, live in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for automation and routine. Once a behavior is stored there, it no longer requires constant decision making. It just happens. This is a real brain hack. You don't think your way into habits, you repeat your way into them. Repetition is what tells your brain this is familiar, this is predictable, this is safe. And safety is what allows the behavior to stick. This is why sustainable change doesn't come from dramatic overhauls or massive bursts of motivation. It comes from making the behavior small, repeatable, low threat, and easy enough that your nervous system doesn't panic. When you design habits that feel safe to repeat, that are easily digestible for the brain, even on low energy days, they migrate out of the prefrontal cortex and into the basal ganglia. That's when consistency stops feeling like effort. That's when change becomes automatic. And that's why the goal isn't to force yourself into growth. It's to build habits your brain can relax into. Because when the brain feels safe, it stops resisting. And that's when real lasting change finally becomes possible. So then the question becomes, how do we actually build habits and systems that allow change to thrive and allow the brain to feel safe enough for rewiring to happen? Because if your nervous system doesn't feel safe, like we just said, no amount of planning or willpower will make it stick. The answer isn't more force, it's better design. So here are some options that you can start incorporating into your routines. You might want to start with the identity and not the outcome. Most people start with the outcome. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to book the job. I want to write the script. And it's good to know your long-term goals, but outcomes live in the future and the brain can't actually practice the future. Instead, once you have set the long-term goals, ask yourself, what does this goal require me to do or be consistently? Examples are like, I am someone who shows up imperfectly. I am someone who moves slowly but consistently. I am someone who builds systems, not sprints. This matters because the brain is wired to seek consistency between actions and identity. When your behavior matches who you are, the brain feels safe. When it doesn't, the brain resists. Research on identity-based habits shows that lasting behavior change happens when action reinforces self-image. Your brain is essentially saying, this is who I am, of course I do this. You're no longer chasing motivation, you're acting in alignment with who you are. The second thing you can do is shrink the goal until your nervous system feels safe. If your goals trigger dread or avoidance or procrastination, it's not because you're lazy, it's because your brain thinks the goal is a threat. So we don't ask ourselves, how do I push harder? We ask ourselves, how small does this need to be for my nervous system to say yes? Instead of, I want to write every day for an hour, you can say, I want to open the document. I want to write one bad sentence. I want to sit with the work for 5 minutes. This works because small actions don't activate that threat response that we talked about. They build trust. You're teaching and showing your brain, showing up doesn't hurt. I don't get punished for trying. The third thing you might want to do is build systems, not motivation. Motivation is unreliable. Your environment is not. If your environment doesn't support your goals are just wishes. This is where we remove that friction. An example of this is putting your phone in another room when you want to focus. Keep workout clothes visible instead of buried in a drawer. Set up your workspace so starting requires 0 decisions. The goal is to make the desired behavior the easiest option available. When you reduce friction, you reduce the need for willpower, which we already know is finite. The fourth thing you can do is attach habits to existing rhythms. Some people call this habit stacking. I love doing this because your brain loves predictability. So instead of creating brand new routines from scratch, attach new habits to rhythms that already exist. You could, after making your morning coffee, write 1 paragraph. After showering, stretch for 5 minutes. After you close your laptop, take 3 deep breaths. This is called habit stacking, like I said, and it works because your brain already has a trigger. You're not asking the brain to remember something new. You're letting it ride an existing pattern, which equals less thinking, less resistance, and more repetition. The fifth thing you can do is track what you did, not what you didn't do. Most people track their failure, missed days, broken streaks, unmet expectations, but the brain doesn't feel safe when it's constantly being told it's failed. Instead, you can track evidence of trust. For example, I showed up 3 times this week. I stopped when I was tired instead of burning out. I didn't quit entirely. This reinforces safety and success, and your brain learns effort is rewarded, consistency doesn't require perfection, and I can trust myself. And like we said, when the brain feels safe, it wants to repeat the behavior. Real change doesn't come from intensity. It comes from safety, repetition, and self-trust. You don't necessarily need to become a more disciplined person. You need habits that don't require you to override your biology. That's how change stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a new normal. That was a lot to digest, I know, and honestly, it feels like a lot to share in one episode, so thank you for staying with me. I'd encourage you to listen to this episode more than once, and if after listening you still feel unsure about where to start, I want you to reflect on this question. Write down 1 habit so small it almost feels laughable, but you know you could do it every day. Not impressive, just repeatable, because that's where change actually begins. If this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast, leave a review, comment, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. That kind of support genuinely helps us keep going and keep having these conversations. And if you're interested in the Artist Recharge Retreat, the link to apply is in the episode description. As always, I am so happy to learn with you. I am so happy to grow with you. And I will see you on the next episode of Suffering for Art.